When I was in medical school, I had a mother come in because her son was having behavioral issues at school. He was skipping, depressed, didn't take long to find out. He had encopresis. He basically pooped himself without knowing it, which would be hard at any age, but especially in school. Deep dive, he played Xbox every waking moment with no bathroom breaks, stretched things out until he lost sensation, and stuff could squeeze out. Story 2. When I finally got on medication for my anxiety, I found out getting irrationally angry and frustrated almost to the point of crying and screaming at people for touching things certain ways, putting the dishes away wrong, chewing, moving my stuff a few inches, or talking to me when I didn't feel like talking was, in fact, not normal. Thank God for Prozac. Story 3. 95-year-old veteran 5 years in remission from kidney cancer. Came in with 72-year-old wife for a routine follow-up. She wants to know if it's safe to have sex every day, because she's worried about his health. Yep, 95 years old. Fucks every day. No Viagra. We just said, congratulations. Yes, sex every day is very good for your reproductive tract, penis or vagina. It keeps blood flow going and helps you maintain the function of your bits for as long as possible. Use it or lose it, essentially. And it doesn't have to be with someone else, either. Story 4. I feel like my story belongs here even though I'm the patient, since the exact scenario happened to me. A few years back, my mental health totally took a skydive. As a result, I dropped out of school and had to start a recovery program. The first thing I had to do was talk to a psychologist. During these conversations with the psychologist, she'd focus on different parts of my life. So one day she'd ask about relationships, and the next, childhood memories, and so on. After a few conversations, she focused on my social life. I then told her that it's pretty much non-existent, and it always has been. She then stated that I must have suffered from loneliness a lot then. I just told her that I've never actually felt lonely at any point in my life. After all, it's pretty hard to feel lonely with two voices in your head always keeping a conversation. But surely she knew that, right? Well, as it turns out, no. Apparently, everybody else only has their own voice in their head. My entire life has been a lie. Turns out I'm schizophrenic. Who the fuck knew, eh? Story 5. It was more like I realized what was happening was not normal, and it led to the client being diagnosed with what I can only assume was rapid cycling bipolar 2, with psychotic features. Was referred to a more appropriate agency after initial intake, so I didn't do the official diagnosis. He came in and was so down about his life that I called in another therapist to do a suicide assessment together. Once we were going through the questions, the client became excited at having an audience and did a 180 in demeanor. I have never experienced someone flip so quickly. Aside from the mental health stuff, the client was a really cool person, whom I hoped would get proper medication and go on to live a happier life. Lots of achievable hopes and dreams, and is a really intelligent person, delusions aside. Story 6. Not an oddity or habit, but I was the patient who had 48 hours ambulatory EEG done over the weekend. Had it put on a Friday, go back Monday. An hour or so after it went on, I started noticing it hurting where all the leads are. I'm thinking, no one told me this would be so uncomfortable. I couldn't sleep all weekend. My head was burning and I couldn't get in touch with a doctor. I called the on-call doctor who said that was not normal, and that if it was too intense, go to the ER and get it off or come in as soon as the clinic opens Monday. I waited, paced all weekend, and kept myself occupied. Monday morning they took it off and the leads burned into my skin all over my forehead and scalp. I'm apparently allergic to that metal on the leads and never knew, was having an allergic reaction. The burns were so bad and deep that I had to see a plastic surgeon. Story 7. Not a doctor. The thing that happened to me myself. For around half a year, I had cramps each night, lost weight, could not shit, had worsening eyesight, my urine smelled weird, my skin was extremely dry, etc. I had seen a doctor about the cramps since those were the first things I did. He had recommended magnesium, but that did not help. Anyway, I went on like, that is gonna get better for almost half a year until I saw the same doctor once again and had him take a blood test. Turns out I have diabetes type 1. He could not even tell me the difference between types 1 and 2 though, so I never went to him again. Story 8. I guess I'm the patient. I had epilepsy when I was young and I was put on carbamazepine. I was on that for 8 to 9 years at a very high dose. Simply the NHS forgot I was on it and kept prescribing it. A doctor eventually took me off it. I had to wean off it for a fair while. The nub is, when I was young, I had an excellent memory. I could remember the minute detail. My family sometimes told me that I was a memory bank. After that point, my memory is shockingly bad. Like entire long chunks of time have just gone. For example, I did a project at work about a year ago, which took a long time. Someone logged a bug in my code. Zero memory of my ever producing it. I thought it was a normal thing, just getting old. I think I asked a question on here, but the upshot was to get it checked out. My girl at the time was particularly vocal about it, demanding that my memory problems were not normal. I figured out there were times when I was doing something but had no idea what was going on, but remained perfectly fine. We would have conversations and I'd have no idea what we were discussing. I'd remember events totally out of order in terms of sequence or completely wrong, i.e. conversations with multiple people who couldn't possibly have been there. Lots of things. I went for EEGs, discussed my absences, and how I usually remember things by attributing certain facts to some sort of number trick which I wasn't really conscious of. I just did it, and I realized that would do things, e.g. date and remember nothing of it. This isn't constant, it's just random. I also get sleep paralysis and the rest of it. While this sounds horrific, it's not too bad. I have TEA, but I don't view it as life unlivable. Just sometimes I won't remember things, even with heavy prompting. I was offered a controlled drug, but I declined as I don't think I'm bad enough. It doesn't irritate me enough to do it. I just live by my wall calendar and a couple of notepad.txt files on my computer, and that does me fine. Story 9. These are all pretty common, but it's happened to me 3 times. The first was when I was in about 10th grade and had been having my period for about 2 years. I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to be completely debilitated for a week each month. Uncontrollable vomiting and diarrhea, passing out from the pain, not being able to move, etc. The day my mother finally took me to the doctor was after I had missed a few days of school and went back, only to have her pick me up early. I clearly remember walking down the stairwell to the office and having to sit down because I couldn't move. The pain was so bad and I was afraid of fainting. When I finally got to the car, I was curled up in a fetal position and eventually blacked out. She made me an appointment that day, and since being put on birth control, I've had almost no issues. The next 2 were pretty recent. I'm a psychology major about to graduate, and I still didn't realize I was suffering from depression and severe anxiety. I'd been having a hard time coping with a huge amount of stress stemming from a few situations that happened this semester, and decided to see a counselor on campus. She diagnosed me and sent me to a doctor where I went on antidepressants. About 6 weeks later, and I feel back to normal. Better, actually. Looking back, it's pretty clear I've probably had anxiety since I was a teenager, but just didn't realize it. Turns out, you're supposed to want to get out of bed and live your life. The last thing. I always thought I just had bad self-control and no discipline. I thought I was just fat and gross. Nope. Binge eating disorder. Still working on that. I think this stems from a need for control, a bad coping mechanism, and body issues since I was a child, brought on by comments from adults. Growing up, you were taught that only really skinny people have eating disorders. Nope. Story 10. Was an in-home health assessor for state insurance. In the apartment of a bed-bound obese woman and her 10 to 11-year-old son. Disgusting apartment. Noticed large wet stains on the carpet and asked if there was a leak. I'd have to notify Medicaid, who would then reach out to Section 8. Nah, that's where I get up and pee. I don't use the toilet, and my lazy son won't clean it up. I used to see this kid out and about, usually a town or 2 over, just walking. He had a very noticeable deformity and was the nicest kid for his age. Haven't seen him in a few years. I bet mom died and he got into appropriate care. Story 11. This actually happened to me. All my life, my joints sometimes popped out of the socket. I would always pop it back in and carry on. One day my hip went out and I fell, and I popped it back in, took a Tylenol, and hours later, it still hurt like a bitch, so I went to the ER. Told the doc what happened and he takes it very seriously, and I said, "It's not a big deal. Happens all the time. It just won't stop hurting and I'm afraid I may have broken something." He says, "What do you mean it happens all the time? It shouldn't." I said, "Well, it does." He replies, "Have you not told your primary about this? That's not normal." I was like, "It's not? I thought it happened to everyone." Apparently not. Doc prescribed a painkiller and told me to be careful and to see my primary. Long story short, I was diagnosed with EDS. Story 12. A 50-ish-year-old man who came in for chronic issue follow-up brought his wife with him this time around. At the end of the visit, she says, "Hey, tell the doc about that thing you can do." He turns to me proudly and tells me that he can whistle from his penis. If he really pushed, he could blow gas from it. His wife insisted it wasn't normal, but he was certain most guys could. Turns out he had a connection between his bowel and his bladder. Mom brings her kid in because the babysitter was concerned about these spells the child would have. Apparently, the child would have episodes where he would just blankly stare at them and not acknowledge whatever it is they were telling him, or whatever he was doing. The parents just thought he was being an asshole and not listening to them, or being absent-minded. The kid turned out to be having absent seizures. A younger gal who had come in for generalized abdominal pain that she experienced on and off for years. but just always wrote off to either menstrual cramps or bad food or life. We had asked her if her bowel movements were regular, and she said yes. At some point, someone was sharp enough to ask her how often she had bowel movements, to which she said, about once every 2 to 3 weeks. She had been suffering from pretty severe constipation, but just thought it was normal to have BMs once or twice a month. I'm sure I have more, but I think I wrote enough for now.